Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria, is a controversial and criticized leader worldwide. His rule has become a period of unprecedented suffering for the Syrian people. He has been in power since 2000, following the death of his father, Hafez al-Assad. While the first decade of his rule was somewhat stable, his leadership took a dramatic turn following the 2011 Arab Spring movement, which ultimately led to the Syrian civil war, a period marked by widespread human rights violations and severe repression. Bashar al-Assad's rule. Bashar al-Assad came to power in 2000 after the death of his father, Hafez al-Assad, who had ruled Syria for nearly 3 decades. Initially, Bashar promised reforms and modernization, presenting himself as a more open-minded leader. However, in practice, his administration maintained the one-party, authoritarian system his father had established. Political opposition was suppressed, and dissent was harshly repressed. Deterioration after the 2011 Arab Spring. In 2011, the Arab Spring, a series of protests and uprisings across the Arab world, spread to Syria. Syrians, inspired by the movements in neighboring countries, began to demand political freedom, basic rights, and democratic reforms. Initially, peaceful protests erupted across the country. However, instead of responding to these demands with reforms, Bashar al-Assad's government resorted to violent repression. His security forces cracked down on protesters with deadly force, escalating the situation and eventually leading to the onset of the Syrian civil war. Syrian civil war and the repression of the people. During the Syrian civil war, Bashar al-Assad's forces engaged in widespread torture, violence, and war crimes. The government forces were accused of committing numerous human rights violations, including genocide, torture, sexual violence, and indiscriminate killings of civilians. Multiple international organizations, such as the United Nations, Amnesty International, and Human Rights Watch, reported that Assad's regime subjected the Syrian people to brutal treatment. Large-scale chemical attacks, airstrikes, and the use of explosives destroyed cities and villages, killing thousands of civilians. One of the most horrific incidents was the 2013 Ghouta attack, which occurred near Damascus, where hundreds of civilians were killed in a chemical weapons assault. This incident drew widespread international condemnation. However, the Assad government denied responsibility, claiming that it was carried out by terrorist groups. Human rights violations and international response. The major issue with Bashar al-Assad's rule is his government's consistent violation of human rights. Under his leadership, the Syrian government engaged in systemic oppression, genocide, and torture, turning his regime into one that was universally condemned. Investigators have repeatedly presented evidence of war crimes and human rights abuses by Assad's forces, yet the regime has persistently denied these allegations and ignored global criticism. Furthermore, Assad has been able to maintain his position through the support of international allies, particularly Russia and Iran. These countries have provided significant military assistance, helping Assad's regime stay in power. This support has made the conflict even more complex and drawn out, with Syria becoming a battleground for international powers. As a result, millions of Syrians have been forced to flee their homes and seek refuge abroad. Challenges for Assad in the world. Bashar al-Assad continues to create immense suffering for the Syrian people under his rule. His regime poses a serious challenge not only for Syria but also for international politics. Many countries have imposed sanctions, taken diplomatic action, and even considered military intervention against his regime. However, with the backing of Russia and Iran, Assad has been able to retain power. Today, Syria still faces a massive humanitarian crisis, and international organizations such as the United Nations are providing much-needed aid to the people. Conclusion. Bashar al-Assad's reign, marked by brutal repression and widespread human rights violations, will be remembered as a dark chapter in history. His government's violence, war crimes, and mistreatment of the Syrian people have earned global condemnation. The Syrian civil war continues to this day, with the Syrian people enduring relentless suffering, oppression, and death.